So just me this time because Tiberius has had a better offer for somewhere to sleep. But this time I'm going to talk about just some very high level nutritional fundamentals. And unfortunately, this is going to be really quite high level because this topic is something that would take hours and hours to kind of get through properly, really, or at least a 4 hours lecture. But I just want to cover some really key points when it comes to macronutrients in particular. So that's your fats, carbs, and proteins. So the kind of key thing to know about macronutrients is they are your primary energy sources, and you are using all of them all of the time, but just on a sliding scale as to which is in the ascendancy and which is getting used very little. I mean, really, your proteins you don't really want to be using those too much for energy, but in like a long course triathlon, etc., you inevitably use a elevated amount of protein for energy. So yeah, that's just kind of one key concept is that you're using all three macronutrients for energy at any one time, but depending on the level of exercise, which is the focus changes. So starting with fats. Now, fat, you basically have an abundance of fat in your body. Even if you're sort of 6% body fat, you still pretty much have all the body fat that you need. Um, it is pretty much, it's in abundance, but fat is very slow to metabolize, much slower than carbohydrate. And so it really kind of is utilized at very low intensity exercise, and you can become more efficient. So if you hear the term that somebody is fat adapted, it's not a superpower, and some people talk about it as if it's a superpower, and it really irritates me. But basically, all it means is that they have a very good aerobic base. They do a lot of training at low intensity, so their body is better equipped at utilizing fat for energy, and probably most importantly, their body is good at sparing their carbohydrate stores. Um, so yeah, don't be put off by some of this language. It's yeah, it's suggesting something that it's not. But yeah, fats are very important. And for an endurance athlete in particular, you do want to become efficient at utilizing fat for energy so that you can spare your carbohydrate stores. But you are still going to have to inevitably use a lot of carbohydrate for any kind of endurance sport. And the higher intensity of the sport, the higher intensity of the discipline, the more carbohydrate you're going to use and the quicker you're going to run through it. So in your body, you have, if you're fully stocked up, you have about an hour to an hour and a half worth of glycogen, the storage form of glucose, in your muscles and liver. Okay, so an hour to an hour and a half worth of exercise can be supported with your glucose, your glycogen stores. So anything beyond an hour and a half in terms of training or racing, you're going to need to take something on board. And even within just an hour and a half racing at least, carbohydrate can have a really positive impact. I'm not going to go into that because that's subject to another chat. But in terms of what we're focusing here is on your daily eating rather than fueling training, because that's a slightly nuanced subject. Excuse me. But basically, with carbohydrates, you have a sliding scale of complexity. Your more complex carbs, we're talking about sweet potato, whole wheat products, brown rice, that sort of thing, quinoa. Basically, forms of carbohydrate that are much slower to break down, as opposed to something like simple sugar, like your glucose, your maltodextrin, whatever, your really simple sugars that we perhaps consume during exercise to get into our system as quickly as possible. Now, if we kind of just put the exercise to one side and we just talk about your normal daily eating, um, the complex versus simple carbs is important because when you consume carbohydrate, and that is kind of converted into glucose and then gets into your system, your blood glucose levels are managed by your insulin. And so if you dump really simple sugar into your system, again, leaving exercise aside, we're just talking about, eating a chocolate bar or something, something really sugary. what tends to happen is your insulin spikes to bring your blood glucose levels back down. And unfortunately, it's not kind of like, a really level up and then back down to baseline. It's a big crash basically. And that's why complex carbohydrates should be such a fundamental part of your daily, like, general nutrition, because they're broken down much slower. That insulin spike is just it's more of an ebb and flow. Um, and another aspect of this is that when you do have big peaks and troughs in your insulin, your blood glucose levels, what tends to happen is that when you get those big insulin spikes, it shunts a lot glucose into your fat tissue, into your adipose tissue, and that's why when people who are perhaps trying to lose weight, but they aren't moving away from more simple forms of carbohydrate in their daily nutrition, they can struggle to lose weight because they're still getting glucose shunted into their fat tissue. So yeah, that's carbohydrates, and then proteins. So you're for a normal athlete, amateur athlete, you're looking for somewhere between 1.2 to 1.7 grams of protein per day per kilo body weight. And this is actually an area where I see people are quite a lot of amateur athletes are deficient. They quite often are not getting enough protein in, and it might seem like a lot if you do the calculation. It might seem like a lot to fit into your day, but it doesn't have to be in one meal. It doesn't even have to be in your main meals. You can spread this sort of food over the course of the day. And that was also linked to another thing that I'm seeing fairly regularly with new athletes, is they are not meeting their calorie requirements, and in some instances, they might be over 1,000 calories underneath their energy requirements. And if that's something you have to address, guys, because being under your calorie needs, it can have such an impact on your life. For female athletes, it can mean the absence of a period, and can really affect your menstrual cycle and your fertility. For men, it could equally, for men, the symptoms are not so obvious, but it can have a really big impact on men as well. And again, a conversation for another time, but make sure you're meeting your protein requirements. Make sure you're meeting your energy requirements. And then the last thing to say about protein is that post-exercise protein is critical for your recovery. So for men, we have about an hour's window where our muscle protein synthesis, it's a really hard sentence to say, muscle protein synthesis is elevated. So basically within that hour's window, if you're consuming a meal high in protein, your body is really good at pushing that into repairing your muscles, etc., and helping your body to evolve. For women, unfortunately, that window is quite a bit shorter. It's usually around half an hour. But the point really doesn't really matter, is that after exercise, you want a big hit of protein, 20, 30 grams of protein, get it into your system as quickly as possible. And that's where things like protein shakes come in. Again, subject not gonna cover because we just don't have the time in a 10-minute talk. But those are just some kind of key points when it comes to nutritional fundamentals. It's not going to change your world, but hopefully just a little bit of knowledge can start the journey towards better nutrition, basically.